Hey, how we doing? Welcome to Your Successful Retirement. If you recall, if you're an active listener rather, we talked a couple months ago about just kind of preparing for late stage elderly, I hate that term, but elderly care, what type of housing you were going to be in. And then about a month or two ago, we talked about the different levels of care if you needed professional help or just even amateur help, of home care all the way to nursing homes. And I promised that we talked about strategies. And that's what I want to talk about today is strategies, is what's the best way to plan for that financially. And unfortunately, there's no real best way. It really is very individual, in nature. But I want to give you a sense of what's going on so that you can make good decisions. Because I find people dive into a decision. They hear something on a podcast, on the radio, from a friend, from an attorney, from an insurance person, and I have to do this. I want to give you a good breadth of different things that are possible to do, just so we have a sense of that. Remember that from the previous episodes, that what we're really trying to do is to preserve assets by forcing Medicaid rather, to pay for your care. So Medicaid is a process that if you get approved for, will pay for your nursing home care. And I said that very carefully. Said it quickly, but carefully. Medicaid will pay for a nursing home, and that's it. Nursing, if you need assisted living, if you need care in your home, Medicaid is not going to pay for those options. So all of the work we're going to talk about today is only if you enter into a nursing home. If you're trying to avoid one at all costs, none of this is going to help. Every other option is going to require you to write checks every single month. Nothing you can do will hide that money because they're going to require you to pay anyway. So we need to be aware of that. And I was looking up last week, preparing for this, some of the statistics related to nursing homes. And I was shocked by this number. I suspected it, but it shocked me. Back in the 80s, throughout the 90s, you saw the average stay at a nursing home got longer and longer. We've talked about this before of when my great-grandfather was getting older, was in his late 80s. My grandmother took care of him for a number of years, and then he went to a nursing home for a short period of time, I think less than a year, And that was very common. And what was happening was, as care improved, as people felt that it was okay to that it wasn't a failure to send dad to the nursing home because it was helping him, that average stay started growing from about 12 months to, in about year 2000, that number was 30 months. That was the average stay in a nursing home back then. And at the time, there was something called the lookback. And the look back at the time was 36 months or 3 years. As the government says, look, if you do any movement of your money within 3 years of entering a nursing home, we're going to disqualify you to some extent. That number is now 5 years or 60 months. And the logic was that the government would update that number every so often just to keep it ahead of the average stay in a nursing home, which I thought was kind of smart. And then they jumped to 5. And the assumption within the financial community, people at large, was the government anticipates that this is going to go from 3 years to 5 years over the next several years. And we don't want to keep changing it. We're just going to make it 5 years. And I looked up the number last week, and I don't believe the average person staying for 5 years. I don't think you believe the average person stays in a nursing home, not assisted living, not at home care, just a nursing home for 5 years. It's not. It's 16 months. The government tells us that the average stay has dropped from 30 months, 30, to 16 months in the last 25 years. That is staggering. Why is that? Because people have more resources and they're spending that money on resources like at-home care and some sort of assisted living. I've talked about in the past, my folks are looking for senior living. They're not quite at the assisted living stage, but they're looking for senior living, community, food, somebody keeping an eye on them, rides to the hospital or the doctors if they need it, although both of them still drive. those levels of care didn't exist 40 years ago, and you're starting to see more of that. And this problem is only going to get more complex. I'm going to go way off the reservation here. A couple of months ago, I was listening to a podcast. That's what I do. When I'm in the car, I don't listen to music. I haven't listened to music in the car regularly. Well, my oldest daughter's 28, so at least 28 years is the last time I can remember. Back when we listened, remember used to listen to the radio? Nobody listens to a radio anymore, I don't think. They listen to Spotify or podcasts or something. I listen to podcasts now. I listen to nothing for years. So my time in my car, which is probably an hour to an hour and a half a day for, between commute and things like that, is listening to podcasts. I have some regulars. I have some add-ins. If I have extra time in the car, I get to listen to this one or that one. I have some that if I'm on a road trip that I save just for that because they're serial in nature. They're not weekly or bi-weekly or anything like that. They're once every year or two, they put out like 12 episodes. So I kind of hold those off for that. But I was listening to one and they had a deer researcher. And bear with me on this. This is absolutely fascinating. And deer researcher out in the western part of the country is the Rocky Mountains area. And here in the Northeast, deer don't migrate. They live in the same area relatively all year round. And deer out in the Rocky Mountains, in the summertime, they climb the mountains and there's grasses up there. And then in the wintertime, they come back down because there's too much snow up there. And it's a very different type of white-tailed deer. Well, they found something interesting. And what they found was in bad years, in bad snow years, it caused a ripple effect in the herd. It didn't just wipe out deer that year, which it did wipe out a lot of deer in those years, but there was a problem with it took longer than they expected for the deer herds to recover. They started doing research on why. And what they did find was the fawns born that next spring were small. And those fawns stayed small. They stayed small their entire lives. And they started doing radio collar surveys. And they were fascinating radio collar surveys. They radio collar a doe. And then they somehow, through the radio collar, know when she delivers the babies. And they literally race in and radio collar the babies so they can keep track of multi-generations of these deer. In addition, they were doing the similar tests on captive deer. If you've ever been to a restaurant and ordered venison, it's not wild venison. That's actually illegal. Market hunting was eradicated 110, 120 years ago. I think it was Teddy Roosevelt era. So probably 120 years ago. You can't go out, shoot a deer, and bring it to your local restaurant and sell it to them. It's illegal to do so. So the venison you get in a restaurant or you buy in the store is farm raised. So they went to these farm raised and they did these same tests. And they thought, well, maybe it's because of the conditions that year. Maybe it's because of lower quality food sources after the tough winter. Nope. They went through a whole bunch of them. And it came down to the nutritional intake of the mothers during pregnancy. 100% of it is these deer these fawns they were having in the spring, not only were small to start, they were behind the pack, no pun intended, their entire lives. They were smaller. The bucks were not developing as quickly. They had smaller antlers. They had smaller bodies. Everything was just stunted because of it. And it was 100% because of the nutritional intake of the mothers during pregnancy. And you're thinking, what the heck does this have to do with nursing homes? Bear with me, because here's what else I know. And I know this from dealing with a bunch of different things, is all animals on this planet, whether you believe it's God or evolution, it doesn't matter. We're all part of the same systems. If you think about it, if you look at the stock market and you look at an ant colony or a beehive, very similar. You look at any group of people, especially in a survival type situation, you look at a pack of wolves, they're identical. The systems exist. So the systems carry through. And this is completely my conjecture. It would take a lot to kind of figure this out. But I think about my folks who are in their 80s. And they had okay nutrition. They were born in the 40s, the early 40s, where things were tough early on, but then they received okay. And the late 30s were actually all right, at least around here. But we were in a place geographically that didn't have a ton of starving people versus, maybe Appalachia or something like that. But my parents, as they grew up, lived in a very different world with very different nutritional opportunities. And because of that, when my mom was pregnant with the three of us, me and my brother and my sister, her nutritional health was great in comparison to her mom. And then I look at me and my wife and forget the nutritional gains we had on top of vitamins that they were feeding her, on top of all these other things, stacks up again. And then I look at my daughter, who has two children of her own. And even in the 26, 28 years difference between when we were having her and she's having babies now is an improvement of the nutritional content of what we're taking in, the monitoring during pregnancy. I think about that and I think of how old my grandparents were when they passed away. And I think of how old my parents are today. And I wonder, how old am I going to be when I get to look as old as my parents? Because I look a lot younger than my dad did at the same age. I'm 56. My dad looked old at 56. I remember he was 50. And part of this was me. I get it. I was young and dumb. He was 50. I was 20. And ran out to mow the lawn because he's getting too old to mow the lawn because it was a big lawn. That's the type, but he was gray at 40. I have a little bit of gray at 56. Big difference in how we look. And I look at my kids and I look at my grandkids. We are likely going to see an increase in life expectancy in this country, especially in this country, but in the developed world in general over the next 50 years that we have not anticipated. What does that mean? It means we may need more of this type of care. And people don't want to go to the nursing home. And we've got to kind of figure all that out of, if you're under the age of 80 right now, you may be dealing with this longer than you want, and you may need to plan. So that's kind of where we're starting with all of this. And I want to go through some strategies that people implement, talk about why they're good, and kind of talk about why they're bad. And when we're planning in this realm, we call it long-term care planning. This is the worst part of planning. I dislike it. And I don't dislike it because it's tedious or it's difficult, or I dislike it because in every other aspect of planning, retirement, income tax, investments, asset protection, when we present to a client, we say we do this small change and we get this huge benefit. We make this small change in your taxes and we get this gigantic refund or whatever it is. That's awesome. When we look at long-term care planning, because we don't have a crystal ball, we don't know what your life is going to look like 5 to 25 to 30 years later from now, we're taking our best guess, and our best guess is likely to be wrong. And our best guess is very much influenced by which choice do I make will have the least negative impact on me. And that's it. Might not be the right choice, but we don't know. There's so much unknown going on in the future that there's no way to plan for it. That makes things very difficult. So these aren't great strategies. Not a single one of them you go, oh, that's the one I would do because it's awesome. There are drawbacks to every single one of these. And we have to sit there and figure out, well, which drawback are we willing to live with in the future? And I will tell you this, we've made these decisions for clients 20 years ago, and we're dealing with the issue today type of thing. And people come back with, well, I wish, and I go, nope, we're not playing that game. I can open the file and show you where we made this decision and why we made that decision and why it was a good decision at the time. We didn't know this was going to happen, and we can't play that Monday morning quarterback game. I woulda, shoulda, coulda. We did the best we could, and we're going to deal with it now. So all that being said, let's talk about some of the strategies. Probably the most common one I hear people talk about are trusts. We need to set up a trust. I'm worried about losing my money to a nursing home. I need a trust. When people talk about that, whether they know it or not, they're talking about an irrevocable trust, or what attorneys will term irrevocable. And it bugs the bejingles out of me. They say, well, that's a revocable trust, and that's an irrevocable trust. Did you catch that the second time? I bet you didn't. You're going to sit there with like your ear out. That's why I say irrevocable. What was the one during the Clarence Thomas hearings 40 years ago was harassment. It's not harassment, it's harassment. It's harassment. We all say harassment, except for attorneys. Attorneys say harassment. Same thing here is we have the irrevocable trust. Now, irrevocable means you can't change it. It's not easy to change. It's pretty much locked up. I do have some attorneys that think that they can get them unlocked, and it's very easy. I'd be careful about that. But putting money into an irrevocable trust or putting assets into an irrevocable trust will make them disappear because they're no longer yours. So remember that 5-year look back. We can do everything 5 years before we need care. So 5 years before we need care, because we have a crystal ball and know exactly when that's going to be, we take these assets, whether it's property or financial assets, and place them into this trust. 5 years later, 60 months later, that money effectively disappears. You have no duty to report any of it to anybody because it's no longer yours. It hasn't been yours for 5 years. You apply for Medicaid, they approve you immediately. Well, immediately, you'll send probably 4 inches of data to them when you apply. If you've ever known somebody who's applied for Medicaid, if you've applied for an older relative, it's an awful process. It is a ridiculously long application, form, book. And then on top of that, you have to provide 5 years, 60 months of financial data. And not just like print does. They want statements for every single account for all 5 years. Good luck. It's awful. It's horrific to do. But you do all of that. None of this shows up. It disappears. So that's a big advantage. I get to hide all that money. What's the drawback? There are several, which is why in 34 years, I've never seen anybody put a financial asset into an irrevocable trust for Medicaid purposes, ever. Not even recommended by any attorney. I don't think I've had an attorney recommend it, because the first drawback is you can't have any of the assets back ever until after you die, when you cannot use them. So that's a big deal. So the government says if it's not in your name, you can't have it. That's very serious. So placing assets in there that you may need later on is not going to help you at all. It might help you for needing a nursing home, but you don't get to live off of those assets. A lot of times people will place their house into an irrevocable trust. That can be a good idea. It comes with other downsides. Number one, if you decide to sell your house and move somewhere else, it's not your house. Usually it's one of your children or multiples of your children who are the trustees. So they'll have to sign off on everything because it's not your house. You have the right to live there and utilize the assets in that manner, but that's about it. You can't borrow against it. So if you decide to move up for whatever reason and need to borrow money, it's owned by the trust. The trust has no income. The trust cannot borrow money because it doesn't have an income so that it can qualify for a mortgage. And lastly, and this is the one that rarely does an estate planning attorney or a long-term care attorney or an elder care or Medicaid planning attorney will mention to a client. And I think that's a full stop problem and people are unaware. If you place your house into a Medicaid trust, when you die, there is no step up in basis. And when your children go to sell that house, they are going to pay taxes on the entire gain. So let's say you paid $200,000 for your house 15, 20, 25 years ago. You live another 15 years. The house is worth $800,000. There's a $600,000 gain that they will pay taxes on. Figure maybe a quarter of it, maybe 20%. But let's call it a quarter. It's $150,000 tax that they will owe. There's nothing you can do about it. That's very, very important information for something that you may never even need. Is you may not need a nursing home. You've done all of this work, you sheltered everything, and you guaranteed losing $150,000. You need to be aware of that before you make that decision. Second one that people talk about is annuities. Oh, you get this annuity and it makes the assets disappear. And this is a quirk in how Medicaid law works. And Medicaid, like I said earlier, I think it's a state-run program, but through the federal funds. So the feds have these guidelines that the states have to abide by, but they can kind of set their own rules within certain limits. But one of the federal quirks is that income and assets are treated differently. Assets are if you need a nursing home and you have assets, you have a bank account with $100,000 in it, they're going to say spend the assets within that trust. But if you have a pension, there's no mechanism to make that pension turn into an asset. So they may, say you owe 90% of your pension every month towards the nursing home. Okay. But they can't physically take it. And if you have a beneficiary on that, it will carry to the beneficiary without having to worry about Medicaid trying to take that money on the backside. So we see sometimes, I don't want to say a lot of the time, we see sometimes, because it's not a great strategy. I will be honest. It does work in some circumstances, but it's very, very specific. Is people will take that $100,000 bank account and they will purchase an old school annuity. Now, if you're over 75, you know what I'm talking about. If you're under 75, let's go through some explanation. It used to be eons ago, 1950s, 1960s, and before. When you bought an annuity, you deposited money with the insurance company during your lifetime. And when you retired, you stopped paying them and they started paying you based on how much money you gave them over that period of time. And they'd send you a statement annually saying your annuity amount at 65 is going to be this based on what you have today. And they guarantee it. It was a mechanism to private pay into a pension system. And they still exist today. Most annuities are investment type vehicles today, but they still have these things. They're called immediate annuities. And you can deposit a lump sum of money into it and start receiving an income back. Well, that exchange from changing from an asset to income is not a disqualifying transfer. It's still all yours, but you've traded that asset that the government's going to force you to spend to an income stream that they may not force you to spend so much of. It gets kind of complicated, but the gist of it is that you can put a survivor on that annuity and they can carry on and receive money. And it can work. You're going to lose. You don't want to do this just because it's a good idea or somebody tells you it's a good idea. This is an emergency type only situation, usually with if you have two spouses and the healthy spouse also has all the assets because you don't take the healthy spouse's income. This can be a very attractive way. Also, if you have a single person and we're looking to preserve some of the money and we don't think they're going to be there very long, but we're trying to make sure that the children receive some sort of income afterwards, it will be good. The difficulty with annuities is it's a guaranteed loser in most of these situations. And this is less true today than it was 30 years ago, but go to most major cities in the US and look at the names on the largest buildings. I grew up in the Boston area. It's the John Hancock building in the Prudential Center. You go to Hartford, Connecticut. Hartford, Connecticut is the insurance mecca of the world. You go to New York City. Most famous building in New York City is the Empire State Building. Empire State is not owned, doesn't mean it's owned by the state of New York. Empire State was an insurance company. You go to San Francisco, there's this cool triangular building, Transamerica building. Insurance companies stack the deck in their own favor with annuities. If it's not an absolute emergency situation, you shouldn't do it because you're likely not going to get back what you put in. There's a time value of money aspect that you need to be aware of that just doesn't exist in their minds, is they are trying to make sure that they win at every cost. And they do win at every cost. They're not trying to win the average. They're trying to win every person. And they know they're not going to do it. Somebody's going to live long enough to beat them out. But their goal is to keep more than they pay out. And that works against you in most circumstances. But for an emergency, it can be helpful, but you need to be aware is what does an emergency look like? And is this a good deal or am I just giving it up? Is it better sometimes just to pay? Third option, very common. Oh, if I start getting sick, I'm going to give it away. I'm going to give it to my kids. It's an option. It still requires that 5-year, 60-month look back. Is if you give money away, you've got to wait 5 years before you apply. You don't even apply today. The way the rules are today, you don't apply until year 5, until the end of year 5, because it will hurt you immediately. It used to be that they gave you kind of a grace period. Not anymore. Is you wait 5 years, the whole 5 years. But after that 5 years, the asset disappears. Okay, good deal. The kids have access to it. So if they need to kind of like backdoor money to you, they can. Pay for things for you, they can. There's nothing wrong, nothing that says that they can't pay things for you. They can't give money back to you because that's a gift to you and that counts against you. And the government would just force you to pay that. But they can pay for your groceries. They can pay for your durable medical equipment, things of that nature. So they can provide assets back to you. What's the downside? Well, it's obvious. Once that money leaves your hands, it's no longer under your control. I know you love your kids. I love my kids. I know you trust your kids implicitly. I trust my kids implicitly. It doesn't mean that somebody's not going to run out in front of them in traffic and get hit and sue them for your money or your house, or they get divorced and the ex daughter-in-law or son-in-law sues them for your money and your house, and they will win. Those type of things you need to be aware of. In addition, remember we talked about losing that step up in basis when we did with the trust? Same thing here is if you are not the owner of your house when you die, there is no step up in basis and your children will pay all of the taxes due. You need to be aware of this. It's vitally important. Last one. There's a couple of other strategies that work. They're sometimes state specific that I don't want to cover, but the last one is sometimes the most common. And it's sometimes the most common because people get that glassy-eyed look and they just walk away because they've just decided, I can't do this right now. I'm going to do nothing. And I do this a lot I'm half a woodworker. I don't think I'm that great. My kids and my wife think I'm amazing. I'm not. I'm definitely not. I see every gap. I see every crooked whatever. I see every lilt in my sanding. It bugs me to no end. I'm terrible at finishing. But there are times I've been building these 3 filing cabinet drawers, 2-drawer filing cabinets, these 3 for my office at my house. I don't know, 5 months. It's literally a weekend. It's a little bit more than a weekend project with finishing. But it's taking me 5 months because I have to think about things. It's like, oh, I can't do this right now. I got to put this down. And right now I'm at finishing. And it's like, let's order this. And I'm going to think about it for a while because I'm not going to be in a real rush to do it wrong. I don't want to sit there with a bunch of steel wool and mineral spirits to try to get this finish off and start over. So I kind of put things aside. We do the same thing with just about every part of our lives that I'm not sure. Let's just do nothing. And do nothing winds up being the most common strategy people employ for the wrong reason. But there are good reasons to do nothing. It is the cheapest solution in the short term. It doesn't cost anything to do nothing. You're not outlaying anything. You're not hiring an attorney. You're not buying an annuity. You're not transferring assets and losing control. You're doing nothing. It's actually inexpensive. You're not buying long-term care insurance, which you didn't even talk about. Long-term care insurance, unfortunately today, that industry keeps getting smaller and smaller. The government really was trying in the 90s to support it and then stopped. And it's gotten smaller ever since. The premiums are just getting outrageous. If you have a policy that's more than 20 years old, hang on to it for dear life, more than likely, all things being equal. If you have something that's 10 years or less, it probably isn't a great policy in the first place. The costs went skyrocketing and the benefits you're going to get back just are so small in comparison. So long-term care insurance can be expensive. But doing nothing is the cheapest alternative in the short run. It also gives us the most flexibility in the future. Think about it. If I give away my money to my kids or a trust now, I lost that flexibility. Doing nothing allows some flexibility. And you have to do some real deep diving of what did my parents' health look like? What's my health today look like? What illnesses did they have or are common within the family to kind of gauge? Again, we have no crystal ball. So it's important if you're going to do nothing that you know when you're supposed to stop doing nothing. That's probably the biggest thing. Because it could turn out to be the worst thing for you is doing nothing. If you get some sort of illness or disability quickly, you lose that 5-year opportunity. That 5-year window closes like it just slams shut. What do you do then? Well, now you're in crisis mode. So you want to be aware of that. It's also not a great strategy if you've got lingering potential, a high potential for lingering issues. So dementia, Parkinson's, things that you may be in a nursing home for a long period of time. Doing nothing isn't always a good idea. Really depends. And so like we talked about early on, this depends on what's going on in your situation. All of these things relate to how you're doing it. You need to develop your own personal strategy. One size fits all. How do you do that? I'm going to tell you after 34 years of experience, and this is my opinion, I'm going to stand out there all by my onesie, and I'm sorry if I offend a certain group of people out there. The last person I would talk to is a Medicaid or estate planning attorney to start out. The last person I would talk to. Only because I have watched numerous cases over the years that were self-evident to me that Avenue A is the right thing for this client based on all of these issues that's going on. And the attorney goes to Avenue B, and Avenue B is always a disaster. It's locking things up. It's losing that flexibility that not necessarily do nothing, but let's close off a bunch of different avenues for ourselves, because this has worked for a couple of select clients in the past. And I felt like I was the hero there, and let's reinforce that. Attorneys often are not looking at the whole big picture. They're looking at just their microcosm of things. I'll give you a good, for instance, is I got a doctor. I love this guy. My wife is the same doctor. This guy's, I see him once a year. He spends probably 25, 30 minutes with me, which is shocking. I've never had a doctor do that. And he comes in, he's on the computer, sitting there, typing away, asking me questions. And, and all of a sudden, okay, so what's going on? What's happening with you? What questions do you have? The length and breadth of his knowledge of things always astounds me. I will come up with something. I'll say, hey, I'm thinking about, so a couple of years ago, I said, I'm worried about testosterone. And he just gets this and goes, Dennis, you don't have a problem with testosterone. He said, you work out, you look fine. You've got this, and this. Why do you think? And I gave him the couple of symptoms. He goes, we'll test it. It's going to cost you some money for it, but we'll test it. And I'm telling you, there's not a problem and now he starts rattling all these other stuff up that I never even thought about. He has patients from 18 to 80, and his length and breadth of information of knowing all of the things that need to happen was shocking to me versus going to a specialist. You go to a specialist and they're only focused on that one little area. That's it. I had this cyst on the back of my neck that had to get removed a couple of years ago. That doctor wanted nothing to do with anything else in my life at all. She was 100% focused on that. And if it killed me, that's okay. As long as we get rid of it. Very bizarre. And I find that many times, not always, but enough times that it's hard to filter out who is right or not. Finding an attorney that is looking at the length and breadth of everything, that's looking at everything that's going on in your situation and saying, okay, wait a second, you've got this going on, you need this for this, and you've got this over here, as opposed to, I have done this before, and this is how it works, and this is what you should do. I've just run into too many circumstances. That's going to tick off some attorneys, and I'm sorry. It's just so hard because so many people in that industry are very specialized, and they get micro-specialized on just looking at their own situation. Do you go to the insurance guy that looks at the annuities? obviously the answer is no there. Again, you don't want to be dealing with someone who is, their solution is the thing they sell in the first place. I know it sounds weird, but it's like going to a mechanic and, going to to the dealership and saying, what do you think of this rattle? I'm not sure that they're going to give me the right answer, because their incentive is to make sure that the shop is running at a certain level to make sure they stay open and keep their franchise, versus a trusted mechanic that my Uncle Eddie was a diesel mechanic. He was a great mechanic, and my dad would call him and say, "Can you come over and just look at this?" He didn't want him to fix it, just come over and look at it so I know what the heck I'm doing with our 72 Duster. So when I go to the mechanic, I know what's going on, and he had no problem coming over. I think a fiduciary is the most important person here, and here's why: is they're not going to get paid based on performance. Again, I don't want to irritate people, but an attorney only gets paid for drafting documents. An insurance person only gets paid for selling insurance products. So their incentive, whether they may be the most pious person in the world, their incentive is to do what will make them money, as opposed to just paying somebody a fixed fee or an hourly fee to just look at your situation and tell you what's what, with no added incentive later on of, oh, if I do this, I'll get paid that. Just doesn't make sense to me. It just seems like that's the most common. Now, I will say, it's who I am. That's what I do. So I am biased in that, but looking at somebody's situation, you need somebody that's going to look at all aspects. The reason we bring people through the financial planning process is to look at all of these aspects, all of these issues together as one whole big pile of issues, so we can make sure that we maximize every single section of that, whether it's taxes, investments, retirement, long-term care planning. You need to make sure they're all lined up. So make sure you get the right help when you're making these decisions. Don't make a snap decision. Don't just do it because somebody told you so, or you heard so-and-so did this and they seem very smart. This isn't one of those times to make those types of decisions. This isn't picking the carpet for your living room. This is serious, and it can cost you tens of thousands of dollars or absolute control of your assets, which is a big deal. So with that, I'll let you guys go today. I hope I'm running a little bit long, but I felt it was important to kind of go through all of these different issues. If you have questions, you can jump down into the show notes and reach out to me through the various different things. LinkedIn and our website is is probably the easiest. If you want, you can email me directly. It's Dennis@successfulmoney.com. Really simple. How do I get a hold of Dennis at successfulmoney.com? Oh, there you go. You can get to me. And those emails go directly to me. They don't go to a staff person or anything else. They go to me. So if you have questions or you're worried about these issues and you're thinking, man, I might need to get a second opinion before I go jump into this, might be a good time to do that. So make sure you do that, and I will see you next time. Stay safe out there.
Explore valuable insights into retirement planning with Dennis O'Keefe, a seasoned certified financial planner with over 30 years of experience. Whether you've been retired for years, are on the verge of retirement, or are wondering how to plan for your someday retirement, this podcast is your go-to guide.